The lights in the briefing room of the New Horizon were dim, casting long shadows across the faces of the mixed crew. Lieutenant Jake Morrison stood at the front of the room, his hands behind his back as he looked at the assembled soldiers. Humans stood on one side of the room while aliens filled the other half. The division was clear, like an invisible line drawn down the middle. Jake had been asked to share some tactical stories from human military history. He thought it would help the different species understand each other better. The war against the Void Swarm was going badly, and everyone knew they needed to work together if they wanted to survive. Today I want to tell you about some battles from Earth's history, Jake began, his voice steady but nervous. These stories show how human soldiers have fought against impossible odds. On the alien side of the room, Commander Zektar shifted in his chair. The tall reptilian creature had green scales that caught the light when he moved. His yellow eyes were cold as they watched Jake. Next to him sat several other Zephyrians, their claws clicking against the metal chairs. The insectoid krill soldiers made soft, chittering sounds with their mandibles. Even the energy-based lumens seemed to pulse with what looked like amusement. The first story is about 300 Spartan warriors who stood against an army of over 100,000 Persian soldiers, Jake continued. They knew they would die, but they fought anyway. They held a narrow pass for 3 days, killing thousands of enemies before they fell. A low rumble of laughter came from the Zephyrian section. Commander Zektar's mouth opened to show his sharp teeth. 300 against 100,000? He said, his voice deep and mocking. And they all died? This is your idea of good tactics? Jake felt his face grow hot, but he kept talking. They bought time for the rest of Greece to prepare. Their sacrifice saved their people. Sacrifice, repeated another Zephyrian named Sub-Commander Vexra. What a waste of good soldiers. Any logical species would have retreated to fight another day. The krill soldier Zidek made a clicking sound that was their version of laughter. Humans and their death wishes, he said in his buzzing voice. No wonder your species nearly destroyed itself before joining the Alliance, Jake tried again. Let me tell you about the Alamo. 189 men held a fort against thousands of Mexican soldiers. They could have escaped, but they chose to stay and fight. This time the laughter was louder. Even some of the lumens began to glow brighter, which meant they found something funny. Commander Zektar stood up, his full height making him tower over the humans. More death wishes, he said, spreading his arms wide. Let me guess, they all died too? Yes, but their sacrifice inspired others to fight harder, Jake said, his voice getting smaller. Inspired them to what, die faster? Zektar turned to his fellow aliens. These humans call these failures legends. They worship defeat and call it victory. Captain Lisa Carter, the human commander, felt her jaw tighten. She had been trying to keep quiet, but the mockery was getting worse. These stories teach us about courage and honor, she said firmly. Courage? Vexra laughed again. Throwing your life away for no gain is not courage. It is stupidity. A dead soldier wins no battles. Jake cleared his throat and tried one more time. The Vikings believed that dying in battle was the greatest honor. They fought without fear because they knew death in combat would take them too. Valhalla, the room erupted in alien laughter. The krill soldiers chittered so loudly it hurt human ears. The Zephyrians roared with amusement. Even the normally quiet lumens pulsed with bright colors. Fighting without fear of death? Zik Cage buzzed. That is not bravery. That is mental illness. A soldier who does not fear death will make poor decisions. These are not legends, Commander Zektar said, wiping tears from his yellow eyes. These are fairy tales for children. Did humans also believe in monsters under the bed? The human soldiers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sergeant Ben Adams clenched his fists. Corporal Danny Wright stared at the floor. Private Amy Foster felt her cheeks burn with shame. No wonder humans needed our help, Vexra continued. Your entire military history is based on glorious failure. You celebrate losing battles and call dead soldiers heroes. At least we fight for something more than just survival, Adams said suddenly, standing up. His voice was angry. We fight. For our families, our beliefs, our honor? Honor? Zektar's voice was full of scorn. Honor does not stop laser blasts. Honor does not win wars. Logic and tactics win wars. Then why are we losing to the Void Swarm? Adam shot back. Your perfect logic is not working so well against them. The room went quiet. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Zektar's eyes narrowed to slits. Are you challenging our competence, human? I am saying that maybe there is more to fighting than just cold calculation, Adams replied. Captain Carter stood up quickly. That's enough, Sergeant. Sit down. But the damage was done. The aliens were no longer just amused. They were offended. Zidik's mandibles clicked aggressively. Several Zephyrians hissed softly, which was a sign of anger in their species. Perhaps. Zektar said slowly, the humans would like to prove that their legendary fighting spirit is real. We have combat simulators. Maybe you can show us these amazing warrior skills your myths talk about. Jake looked around the room. The other humans were watching him, waiting to see what he would do. The aliens were all staring at him with expressions that ranged from amusement to challenge. Fine, Jake said finally, we'll prove it. But as he said the words, he felt a chill of doubt. The aliens were right about one thing. All the human heroes in his stories had died. What if the stories really were just myths? What if humans were not as special as they believed? In the back of the room, an old Zephyrian sat quietly watching everything. General Fakemar had not laughed with the others. He had not spoken at all during the briefing. His ancient eyes moved from the humans to the aliens and back again. His expression was unreadable. The general had scars across his green scales that spoke of many battles. Other aliens respected him greatly. He was known as the Iron Scale because he had never lost a fight. But tonight he just sat and watched as the younger soldiers mocked the humans. Tomorrow, Zektar announced, we will test these human legends in the simulator. We will see if your fairy tales can stand against real military skill. The briefing ended with the different species filing out of the room separately. The humans walked together, their heads down. The aliens talked loudly among themselves, still laughing about the stories they had heard. Only General Fakemar remained behind, sitting alone in the dim room. He stared at the empty chair where Jake had been standing. His old eyes held secrets that none of the younger soldiers could imagine. The war against the Void Swarm was about to take a very different turn, but none of them knew it yet. They would all learn soon enough that some myths were more real than they ever imagined. The next morning came too quickly for the human crew. Jake Morrison had barely slept, thinking about the challenge ahead. He walked through the corridors of the New Horizon, passing alien soldiers who whispered and pointed at him. Some made clicking sounds that he knew were their version of laughter. The ship's cafeteria was divided like always. Humans sat at their tables while aliens occupied theirs. The air was thick with tension from the night before. Jake got his food and sat down with Sergeant Ben Adams and Corporal Danny Wright. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. You don't have to do this, Adams said finally. We all know Zektar is just trying to make us look bad. If I don't do it, they'll never let us forget it, Jake replied. They already think we're weak. This is our chance to prove them wrong. Danny looked up from his food. What if we can't prove them wrong? What if they're right about us? Before Jake could answer, a shadow fell across their table. They looked up to see General Fakemar standing there with his food tray. The old Zephyrian scales were darker than the others, marked with scars from countless battles. His yellow eyes held a wisdom that came from decades of war. May I sit? He asked in his deep, gravelly voice. The humans exchanged glances. They had never spoken to the famous general before. He was a legend among all the species in the Alliance. Stories said he had won more battles than any other living soldier. Of course, sir, Jake said, sliding over to make room. The general sat down slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. He began eating without saying anything. The humans watched him nervously, wondering why he had chosen to sit with them around the cafeteria. Other aliens were staring. It was unusual for General Fakemar to sit with anyone, let alone humans. Commander Zektar's table was buzzing with whispered conversations. The Krill soldiers clicked their mandibles in what looked like confusion. "General," Adam said carefully, "we heard you were there last night. During the briefing." Thakmor nodded but did not look up from his food. "I was there. What did you think of our stories?" Danny asked. The general chewed slowly before answering. "I think many things, but thinking and speaking are different actions." The humans waited for him to say more, but he just continued eating. His silence was somehow more intimidating than all of Zektar's mockery across the room. Commander Zektar stood up and walked over to their table. His boots clicked against the metal floor as he approached. Behind him came Sub-Commander Vexera and the Krill warrior Zik H. "General Thakmor," Zektar said with a bow, "I hope these humans are not bothering you with more of their fairy tales." The general looked up slowly. His ancient eyes studied Zektar's face for a long moment. "They are not bothering me," he said simply. "Good," Zektar replied. "I would hate for you to have to listen to more stories about glorious defeats and honorable deaths." Zich clicked his mandibles. "Perhaps the general would like to watch today's simulation. He can see how real soldiers fight compared to these myth believers." General Thakmor's expression did not change. "I will observe," he said. Zektar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "Excellent. Lieutenant Morrison, are you ready to show us how Spartans and Vikings fight?" Jake stood up, his food barely touched. "I'm ready." "Good. The simulation begins in 1 hour. Try not to embarrass your species too badly." As the aliens walked away, General Thakmor continued eating in silence. The humans sat quietly, each wondering what the old warrior was thinking. An hour later, the simulation room was crowded with soldiers from all species. The humans stood on one side while the aliens filled the other half of the room. In the center was a large holographic display that would show the combat simulation. Jake stood in the simulation pod, wearing the neural interface that would let him control a virtual soldier. The scenario was simple: infiltrate an enemy base, retrieve important data, and escape. It was the kind of mission that happened regularly in the war against the Void Swarm. "The simulation is designed for maximum efficiency," Zektar announced. "Logic and tactical thinking are required. There is no room for emotional decisions or heroic gestures." Jake nodded and activated the simulation. The holographic display showed a military base surrounded by enemy guards. The virtual soldier appeared at the edge of the compound, equipped with standard weapons and equipment. Jake began moving his character forward, trying to remember his training. He used stealth at first, avoiding the guards and moving toward the main building. The alien audience watched as he made his way through the compound. "Not bad," Vexera commented. "He shows some basic competence." But then Jake reached the main building and everything went wrong. The simulation had multiple paths to the objective, each requiring different approaches. Jake chose the most direct route, thinking it would be fastest. Alarms began blaring as his character was spotted. "Enemy!" Soldiers poured out of the building. Jake tried to fight his way through, but the simulation was designed to punish aggressive tactics. "He's making too much noise," Zitkh buzzed. "A real soldier would have found another way." Jake's character took heavy damage as he fought through the guards. He was thinking about the stories he had told the night before. The Spartans at Thermopylae had fought against impossible odds. The Vikings had charged into battle without fear. He made his character stand and fight instead of retreating. The virtual soldier fired at every enemy in sight, taking down several guards before being overwhelmed. "Game over," the computer announced. "Mission failed." The aliens began their clicking and hissing sounds of amusement. Jake stepped out of the simulation pod, his face red with embarrassment. "Remarkable," Zektar said loudly. The human chose to fight when stealth would have worked. He chose death over success. "Just like his precious Spartans," Vexera added. "All courage, no brains." Jake wanted to defend himself, but what could he say? The simulation had been designed to test tactical thinking, not heroic gestures. He had failed completely. "Perhaps," Zich suggested, "the human would like to try again. Maybe this time he can remember that dead soldiers complete no missions." The human crew members looked at each other. They could see the disappointment in each other's eyes. Maybe the aliens were right. Maybe their stories were just myths after all. Captain Carter stepped forward. Lieutenant Morrison did his best. These simulations are designed by alien minds for alien tactics. Excuses, Zektar said dismissively. A good soldier adapts to any situation. Your lieutenant failed because he believed in legends instead of logic. As the aliens continued their mockery, General Fakemore remained silent in the back of the room. His old eyes moved from the humans to the holographic display and back again. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that suggested he was thinking deeply about what he had seen. The simulation had ended, but the real test was just beginning. None of them knew that within days they would face a situation where alien logic would fail completely. They would learn that sometimes the old stories were more than just myths, but for now, the humans walked away in defeat while the aliens celebrated their superior wisdom. Only General Fakemore remained behind, staring at the empty simulation pod with eyes that held secrets from wars the younger soldiers could never imagine. 3 days after the simulation disaster, the alarm bells started ringing throughout the New Horizon. Jake Morrison was in his quarters when the emergency signal blared through the ship's speakers. He grabbed his weapon and ran toward the briefing room, passing other soldiers who were doing the same thing. Captain Carter was already there when he arrived. Her face was serious as she looked at the holographic display showing a star map. Red dots marked danger zones where the Void Swarm had been spotted. "What's the situation?" Jake asked as he took his seat. "Research Station Alpha 7 sent a distress signal 2 hours ago," Carter replied. "They're under attack by Void Swarm forces. We're the closest ship that can help them." Commander Zektar entered the room with his alien soldiers following behind him. Zafarian looked confident as always, his scales gleaming under the lights. Sub-Commander Vexra and the Krill warrior Zik H took their seats on the alien side of the room. "How many survivors?" Zektar asked. "Unknown," Carter said. "The station has 43 scientists and 12 security guards. We lost contact with them an hour ago." The holographic display changed to show the research station. It was a large complex built into an asteroid with several levels connected by tunnels. The station studied Void Swarm behavior and weapons. If the enemy captured it, they would learn valuable information about the Alliance. "The mission is simple," Carter continued. "We need to get the survivors out before the Void Swarm takes complete control. The main fleet will create a distraction while a small team infiltrates the station." Zektar stood up immediately. "My team will handle the infiltration. This is exactly the kind of mission we excel at. Quick, quiet, efficient." "We should send a mixed team," Carter suggested. "Humans and aliens working together." "Why?" Vexra asked. "So the humans can charge in shooting like they did in the simulation? This mission requires precision, not heroics." Zik H clicked his mandibles in agreement. "The humans will only get in the way. They think too much with their emotions." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. The aliens had been making jokes about human tactics for days. He stood up without thinking. "We can handle ourselves in real combat. Can you?" Zektar asked with a smile. "The simulation showed us what happens when humans try to fight smart. You failed completely." "That was a computer game," Sergeant Adams said, also standing up. "This is real." "Real combat requires real tactics," Zektar replied. "Not fairy tale nonsense about honor and glory?" Captain Carter raised her hand for silence. "Enough. Commander Zektar, you'll lead the infiltration team. Take 6 of your best soldiers. Lieutenant Morrison, Sergeant Adams, Private Foster, and Corporal Wright will go with you." "Captain," Zektar protested, "the humans will compromise the mission." "The humans are part of this alliance," Carter said firmly. "They go with you." Zektar's yellow eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Very well. But when they get us all killed with their reckless behavior, remember that I warned you." In the back of the room, General Fakemore sat quietly watching the argument. His old eyes moved from speaker to speaker, but he said nothing. The other aliens expected him to support Zektar, but the general remained silent. 2 hours later, the infiltration team was ready to depart. They wore special suits that would let them move through the asteroid's tunnels. Each soldier carried weapons designed to fight the Void Swarm, energy rifles that could penetrate their armor and small explosives that disrupted their communications. The team consisted of Commander Zektar, Sub-Commander Vexra, 4 other Zephyrians, 2 Krill warriors including Zik H, and the 4 humans. They boarded a small stealth ship that would take them to the research station. Jake checked his equipment one more time. Next to him, Private Amy Foster looked nervous. She was young, only 22 years old, and this was her first real combat mission. Sergeant Adams and Corporal Wright were more experienced, but they also looked tense. "Remember," Zektar said as they approached the station, "we go in quiet. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. We find the survivors and get out. Anyone who compromises the mission will answer to me." The research station looked dead from the outside. No lights were visible in the windows, and the communication arrays were damaged. The stealth ship docked at an emergency airlock that the Void Swarm had not discovered yet. Zektar led the team through the airlock and into the station's corridors. The hallways were dark and empty. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls. The air smelled of smoke and something else, something alien and wrong. "Life signs on level 3, Vexra whispered, checking her scanner. 12 humans still alive. Void Swarm presence?" Zektar asked, scattered throughout the station. They seemed to be searching for something. The team moved carefully through the corridors. The Void Swarm were strange creatures, part machine, part living tissue. They could adapt to almost any environment and learn from their mistakes. Fighting them required constant changes in tactics. Everything went well at first. The team avoided the enemy patrols and made their way toward level 3. Zektar's plan was working perfectly. They would reach the survivors, evacuate them through the emergency tunnels, and be gone before the Void Swarm knew what happened. But when they reached level 3, they found something unexpected. The survivors were not hiding in the safe rooms as expected. They were trapped in the main laboratory, surrounded by Void Swarm forces. "It's a trap," Adams whispered through the laboratory windows. They could see the human scientists and guards huddled together in the center of the room. Around them, dozens of Void Swarm creatures waited like predators. The aliens had set up some kind of device that was scanning the humans. "They're studying them," XITCH buzzed quietly. "Learning about human biology. We need to get them out of there," Jake said. "Impossible," Zektar replied. "There are too many enemies. We'll have to retreat and call for backup." "Those people will be dead by then," Foster said. "Better some casualties than losing the entire team," Vexra said coldly. This is why emotions have no place in tactics. But as they watched, the Void Swarm device began to glow brighter. The human prisoners started screaming. Whatever the creatures were doing to them, it was causing terrible pain. "We have to do something," Adam said, his voice tight with anger. "The logical choice is retreat," Zektar said firmly. "We cannot save them." Jake looked at the terrified faces in the laboratory. He thought about all the stories he had told, the Spartans who stood against impossible odds, the Alamo defenders who chose death over surrender, the Vikings who feared no enemy. "Maybe logic isn't always right," he said quietly, before anyone could stop him. Jake activated his weapon and stepped out of hiding. "Hey!" he shouted at the Void Swarm creatures. "Over here." The laboratory erupted in chaos. Void Swarm forces turned toward Jake's position as he opened fire. Behind him, the other humans made their choice without hesitation. "For the prisoners!" Adams yelled, charging forward. Foster and Wright followed, their weapons blazing. The aliens watched in shock as the humans abandoned all tactical sense and rushed toward certain death. But sometimes, Zektar realized with growing amazement, certain death was exactly what was needed. The laboratory became a battlefield in seconds. Jake Morrison's weapon fired continuously as he advanced toward the Void Swarm creatures. Behind him, Adams, Foster, and Wright spread out, creating a line of human soldiers charging into what looked like certain death. The Void Swarm had not expected this kind of attack. Their logical minds had calculated that any rescue team would retreat when faced with overwhelming odds. They had prepared for stealth missions and careful tactical approaches. They had not prepared for 4 humans who simply ignored the mathematics of survival. What are they doing? Zektar shouted over the sound of weapon fire. He watched in amazement. As Jake dove behind a laboratory table, still shooting at enemies that should have killed him already, Private Foster ran along the wall, drawing fire away from the trapped scientists. A Void Swarm warrior nearly twice her size charged at her, with razor-sharp claws. Instead of running, she stood her ground and emptied her weapon into the creature's chest. "They're going to get themselves killed," Vexra said. But her voice carried a note of confusion rather than mockery. Sergeant Adams had reached the center of the laboratory, where the prisoners were being held. 3 Void Swarm creatures surrounded him, but he kept fighting. His movements were not tactical or efficient. They were desperate and wild, like an animal protecting its young. "This is insane," XITC buzzed. "They cannot win against those numbers." But something strange was happening. The Void Swarm creatures were making mistakes. They were confused by the human attack pattern. Their adaptive intelligence was designed to counter logical military tactics, not the chaotic fury of soldiers who fought like berserkers. Corporal Wright had climbed onto one of the laboratory tables and was firing down at the enemy. When his weapon ran out of ammunition, he grabbed a piece of broken equipment and threw it at a Void Swarm warrior. The improvised weapon should not have done much damage, but it struck the creature at exactly the right angle to penetrate its armor. "Impossible," Zektar whispered back on the New Horizon. Captain Carter was listening to the battle through the communication system. The sounds of fighting filled the bridge, weapon fire, explosions, human voices shouting orders that made no tactical sense. "What's happening down there?" she asked into her microphone. "The humans have lost their minds." Zektar's voice came through the speakers. "They're attacking a force 3 times their size." "Are they winning?" Carter asked. There was a long pause before Zektar answered, "I don't know how, but yes. They're actually winning." In the back of the bridge, General Thakmer sat at his usual position. The old Zephyrion had been quiet for days, but now he leaned forward and activated his communication device. "Commander Zektar," his deep voice cut through the battle noise. "Report your status." "General," Zektar's voice was full of surprise. "The humans they're fighting like animals. They should be dead, but they keep advancing." "How many casualties?" Thakmer asked. 3 humans wounded, none dead. The Void Swarm has lost 12 warriors." The bridge crew exchanged glances. 12 Void Swarm warriors was a significant loss. Those creatures were among the most dangerous enemies in the galaxy. "General," Zektar continued, "I need to know what to do. The humans are not following any logical pattern. They're fighting like the berserkers in their myths." General Thakmer was quiet for a long moment. Around the bridge, everyone waited for his response. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years and the authority of countless battles. "Commander Zektar, you will listen to me carefully. I'm going to tell you something that you should have learned long ago." "Yes." "General, the humans are not fighting like their myths. Their myths are based on how they actually fight." The bridge went completely silent. Captain Carter stared at the general with wide eyes. Even the alien crew members stopped what they were doing to listen. "General," Zektar's voice was confused, "I don't understand." "Then I will explain." Thakmer sighed, standing up slowly. "You think I have been silent because I was too dignified to mock the humans. You are wrong. I have been silent because I have fought alongside humans in 3 wars that you are too young to remember." He walked to the center of the bridge, his scarred scales catching the light. His yellow eyes held memories that stretched back decades. 40 years ago, I was a young commander like you. I led a force of Zephyrian warriors against a human rebellion on the planet Kepler 7. We outnumbered them 5-1. We had better weapons, better armor, better tactics. The general paused, looking out at the stars through the bridge windows. The human defenders had no chance of victory. Any logical species would have surrendered. But these humans had made a promise to protect the colony's children. They fought for 72 hours without rest, without food, without hope. What happened? Carter asked quietly. They held the line until evacuation ships arrived. Every human soldier died, but they saved 8,000 civilians. I watched them make impossible shots, survive wounds that should have killed them, and keep fighting when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Thakmer turned back to face the communication device. Commander Zektar, what Lieutenant Morrison told you about the Spartans at Thermopylae was not a myth. It was a historical record. What he told you about the Alamo was not a fairy tale. It was a tactical analysis of human combat psychology. But General, Zektar's voice came through the speakers. Those were defeats. They all died. They died completing their missions, Thakmer replied. A human soldier who promises to hold a position will hold it until he dies. A human soldier who swears to protect civilians will fight impossible odds. A human soldier who gives his word will keep it even if it costs him his life. The general's voice grew stronger as he continued. 25 years ago, I served with a human medic named Dr. Kelly Martinez. During the Battle of Proxima Station, she ran into active combat zones 47 times to retrieve wounded soldiers. She saved the lives of 63 Alliance troops, including 15 Zephyrians. Did she survive? Someone asked. She was killed on her 48th rescue attempt. But the soldier she died saving went on to become an admiral who won the Battle of Centauri Prime. Through the speakers they could hear the battle continuing. Jake's voice came through clearly as he called out orders to his team. Foster, cover the left flank. Right, get those scientists to the extraction point. Adams, watch your 6. General, Zektar said, they're still fighting. The human lieutenant is coordinating the entire battle while under heavy fire. Of course he is, Thakmer said with something that might have been pride. He is doing exactly what his ancestors did at Thermopylae. He is holding the line. The general walked back to his chair, but he did not sit down. Commander Zektar, I want you to understand something very important. The reason humans were invited to join this alliance was not because of their technology. It was not because of their numbers. It was because they can fight beyond the limits of logic. I don't understand, Zektar said. The Void Swarm is winning this war because they adapt to our tactics. They learn from our patterns. They counter our logical approaches. But they cannot adapt to soldiers who fight without logic, who make decisions based on honor instead of survival. The battle sounds were changing. The weapon fire was becoming more scattered. Human voices were calling out that the civilians were safe. Mission accomplished. Jake's voice came through the speakers. All survivors rescued. We're heading to the extraction point. General Thakmer finally sat down, his old bones creaking. Commander Zektar, you have just witnessed something that will change how you think about warfare. The humans did not defeat the Void Swarm through superior tactics. They defeated them through superior will. The bridge crew sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just heard and witnessed. The rescue mission was succeeding, but more importantly, everything they thought they knew about human combat effectiveness was changing. The war against the Void Swarm was about to take a very different turn. The medical bay of the New Horizon was busy with activity. Dr. Sarah Blake worked on the wounded soldiers who had returned from the rescue mission. 3 humans and 2 aliens lay on the medical beds, their injuries being treated by the ships. Advanced Healing Systems. Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat on the edge of one bed, a bandage wrapped around his left arm. Next to him, Private Amy Foster had a cut across her forehead that was already healing. Sergeant Adams and Corporal Wright were both walking around, despite the burns on their armor from Void Swarm. Weapons. The rescued scientists and security guards from the research station were in another section of the medical bay. All 43 scientists had survived, along with 10 of the 12 security guards. The mission had been a complete success, but the cost had been higher than anyone expected. Commander Zektar entered the medical bay, his green scales dulled with exhaustion. Behind him came Sub-Commander Vexra and Zit-H. The alien commander walked slowly toward Jake's bed, his yellow eyes showing something that had not been there before: respect. "Lieutenant Morrison," Zektar said, stopping in front of the human. Soldier. Jake looked up, expecting another argument or more mockery. Instead, he saw something in the alien's face that surprised him. "Commander," Jake replied carefully. "I owe you an apology," Zektar said. The words came out slowly, as if they were difficult for him to say. "I was wrong about human combat methods. I was wrong about your stories. I was wrong about everything." The medical bay became quiet. Other soldiers, both human and alien, stopped what they were doing to listen. "You don't need to apologize," Jake said. "We all did our jobs." "No," Zektar said firmly. "What you did out there was not just doing your job. What you did was impossible. By every tactical calculation, we should have failed. The Void Swarm had superior numbers, superior position, superior firepower." Vexra stepped forward. "We watched you charge into certain death. We watched you fight without any regard for your own safety. We thought you had lost your minds. But you won," Zich added, his mandibles clicking softly. "You saved everyone and defeated an enemy that should have destroyed you." Jake looked around the medical bay at his fellow humans. Foster was smiling despite her injury. Adams and Wright stood straighter, their pride showing clearly. "We did what we had to do," Adams said. "Those people were counting on us." "That is exactly what General Fakmer was trying to tell us," Zektar said. "Your species fights for reasons that go beyond logic. You fight for promises, for honor, for people you have never met." The doors to the medical bay opened, and General Fakmer walked in. The old Zephyrian moved slowly, but his presence filled the room. Every soldier, human and alien alike, stood straighter when they saw him. "How are the wounded?" he asked Dr. Blake. "All injuries are minor, General. Everyone will make a full recovery." Fakmer nodded and walked to the center of the room. His ancient eyes moved from face to face, studying each soldier carefully. "You all performed well today," he said. "But I want to make sure you understand what happened out there." He turned to face the alien soldiers first. "Commander Zektar, what did you learn from this mission?" "I learned that human tactics are not based on fairy tales," Zektar replied. "I learned that what we called myths are actually the foundation of human military strength." "And what else?" Zektar thought for a moment. "I learned that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when soldiers fight for something greater than themselves." The general nodded approvingly. "Sub-Commander Vexra, what did you observe about human combat behavior?" "They fought without fear of death," Vexra said. "But it was not because they were reckless. It was because they had made a commitment to save the prisoners. They would rather die than break their word. And you, Zich?" The Krill warrior clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "I observed that human unpredictability is not a weakness, it is a strength. The Void Swarm could not adapt to their tactics because their tactics were based on emotion rather than logic." General Fakmer turned to the humans. "Lieutenant Morrison, do you understand why I remained silent during your briefing?" Jake thought carefully before answering. "You were waiting to see if we would prove ourselves in real combat?" "Partially correct," the general said, "but there was another reason. I was waiting to see if the younger generation of Alliance soldiers would learn wisdom or remain ignorant." He walked over to the window that looked out into space. Stars shone in the darkness, and somewhere among them, the war against the Void Swarm continued. 40 years ago, when I first fought alongside humans, I made the same mistake that Commander Zektar made. I thought human behavior was illogical and wasteful. I thought their stories were primitive and meaningless. The general turned back to face the room. But I learned something that changed my understanding of warfare forever. I learned that there are two types of soldiers in the universe. There are those who fight to avoid losing, and there are those who fight to win. "What's the difference?" Foster asked. "Soldiers who fight to avoid losing make careful decisions. They preserve their forces. They retreat when the odds are against them. They are logical and efficient." Fakemore paused, letting his words sink in. Soldiers who fight to win make impossible decisions. They charge into overwhelming odds. They sacrifice themselves for others. They keep fighting when logic says they should surrender. And humans are the second type? Wright asked. Humans are the only species in the known galaxy who consistently fight to win rather than fighting to avoid losing, the general said. That is why you were invited to join this alliance. That is why your stories are not myths but training manuals. Captain. Carter entered the medical bay, having heard the general's words over the ship's communication system. General, she said, what does this mean for the war against the Void Swarm? Fakemur smiled, showing his sharp teeth. But this time the expression was not threatening, it was hopeful. It means, Captain, that we have been fighting this war. Incorrectly. We have been trying to outthink an enemy that adapts to our thoughts. We have been using logic against creatures that learn from logic. And now? Carter asked. Now we fight them the human way. We fight them with honor, with courage, with the kind of determination that your ancestors showed at Thermopylae and the Alamo. The alien soldiers looked at each other, understanding dawning in their eyes. You mean, Zektar said slowly, we stop trying to minimize casualties and start trying to maximize victory. I mean, the general said, we stop fighting like accountants and start fighting like warriors. Over the next few hours, word of the successful rescue mission spread throughout the ship. But more importantly, word spread about what General Fakemur had revealed. The alien crew members began approaching, human soldiers with new questions. They wanted to hear more stories about human military history. They wanted to understand the thinking behind seemingly illogical tactics. They wanted to learn how to fight with the kind of determination that could overcome impossible odds. In the ship's library, Jake found himself surrounded by alien soldiers, who listened with fascination as he told them about other human battles. The Battle of Britain, where pilots fought against overwhelming numbers. The Siege of Stalingrad, where soldiers held a city against an entire army. The Charge of the Light Brigade, where cavalry attacked fortified positions knowing they would probably die. These are not stories of defeat, Zitch said with new understanding. These are stories of victory achieved through sacrifice. Every culture has warriors, Jake explained. But humans have something more. We have the ability to make our cause more important than our lives. Commander Zektar, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. General Fakemur was right. Your myths are not fairy tales. They are the secret to defeating the Void Swarm. As the days passed, the atmosphere aboard the New Horizon changed completely. The division between human and alien crew members began to disappear. They started training together, sharing tactics, learning from each other's strengths. The aliens taught the humans about advanced technology and efficient resource management. The humans taught the aliens about fighting spirit and the power of determination. General Fakemur watched these changes with satisfaction. In his long life, he had seen many wars and many different types of soldiers, but he had never seen anything like what was happening now. Two completely different military philosophies, merging into something stronger than either could be alone. The war against the Void Swarm was far from over. There would be more battles, more losses, more impossible missions. But now, for the first time since the war began, General Fakemur believed they could actually win. The humans had shown them that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding defeat, but from refusing to accept it.